The Education of a Value Investor by Guy Spier. Picture yourself fresh out of Oxford and Harvard Business School, feeling like you're on top of the world. You've got the perfect resume, the prestigious degrees, and you've just landed a dream job working directly for a Wall Street chairman. This is it, you've made it. Then, almost overnight, that dream curdles into something dark. You realize you're trapped in a morally bankrupt operation, where shady deals get dressed up as legitimate opportunities, where naive investors are treated like prey, and where your fancy credentials are being used as window dressing to make it all look respectable. You start to feel sick with yourself. The disgust isn't just about the people around you anymore, it's about what you're becoming. This isn't fiction. This was Guy Spier's reality. A man who started his career wanting to be the next Gordon Gekko, only to discover that path led straight into a nightmare. His book, The Education of a Value Investor, isn't your typical investing guide. It's an unflinchingly honest story about losing your way and then finding something far more valuable than money along the journey back. What makes this story so compelling isn't some secret formula for wealth. It's the roadmap Guy provides for building a life of genuine integrity and purpose. His book has captivated hundreds of thousands of readers worldwide, because it speaks to something deeper than our bank accounts. It speaks to who we want to become. Over the next hour, we're walking this path with him, from the belly of the Wall Street beast to a life-changing lunch with Warren Buffett himself. By the end, you won't just understand value investing principles. You'll understand how to build a life where success is measured by your character, not your net worth. You'll discover the power of the inner scorecard and how it can save you from the madness all around us. This is more than finance education. This is life education. Let's dive in. Guy Spier started out brimming with the kind of confidence that only comes from elite credentials. Oxford, check. Top of his class in economics, check. Harvard MBA, check. The world looked ready for the taking, and he wasn't interested in following the herd to Goldman Sachs. He saw himself as an entrepreneur, a trailblazer. So when he spotted a job listing for an assistant to the chairman at a boutique investment bank called D.H. Blair, it felt perfect. The chairman, J. Morton Davis, was a self-made dealmaker who promised Guy he'd be doing deals right away. It sounded too good to pass up. There were red flags. A New York Times article had labeled D.H. Blair as infamous, accused by regulators of fraudulent sales practices. When Guy asked about it, the chairman dismissed it as jealous people trying to tear down success. Young, ambitious, and maybe a little arrogant, Guy chose to believe him. He ignored the skeptical looks from his Harvard friends and signed on, expecting Wall Street riches. He joined in 1993 with the impressive title of vice president. The glamour evaporated fast. The firm's real business wasn't funding world-changing companies. It was pushing speculative, high-risk ventures like cold fusion projects or building space stations with ex-Soviet officials, then selling them to unsuspecting retail investors. The firm was a machine that needed constant feeding. On the 14th floor sat a boiler room packed with aggressive brokers who operated like something straight out of The Wolf of Wall Street, pushing these questionable deals to amateur investors. The investment bankers on the second floor, sitting in their comfortable wood-paneled offices, were the enablers. Guy slowly realized his role was to use his prestigious credentials as cover. He was there to provide an Ivy League veneer, to downplay the risks and hype the potential. His job wasn't careful analysis, it was helping to sell a story. He felt himself sliding toward a moral edge. The environment was designed to push boundaries. The logic was simple and poisonous. If I don't do this, someone else will. It's a pattern that repeats endlessly on Wall Street. Smart, ambitious people, driven by greed or naivety, wander into gray areas. Guy was trapped, miserable, but unable to quit, because that would mean admitting failure. More than anything, he was motivated by how others viewed him, not how he viewed himself. He was living by what Warren Buffett calls the outer scorecard, that constant craving for public approval that so easily leads us astray. If he'd been living by an inner scorecard, a personal code of integrity, he would have run for the hills. But he desperately needed to look successful. His breaking point came with a company called Telechips. It was one of the rare legitimate deals he'd found, a company with real potential. But he watched in horror as his own firm strung the management team along, waiting until they were desperate before changing the deal terms, slashing the valuation, and demanding bigger fees. The company had no choice but to accept. Guy was disgusted with the firm and himself. He'd lost the trust of the very people he was trying to help. Those 18 brutal months at D.H. Blair destroyed the pristine reputation he'd carefully built at Oxford and Harvard. For years afterward, he felt tainted, like he couldn't wash the dirt off his hands. As he puts it, we like to think we change our environment, but the truth is, it changes us. So we have to be extraordinarily careful, choosing the right environment. This painful experience became the most important part of his education. It was a lesson no classroom could teach. He learned that reputation is everything. As Buffett once said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. In this dark place, deep in disillusionment, he found a lifeline. During lunch breaks, looking to escape his desk, he'd wander into a business bookshop on Broadway. One day, he picked up The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, with a preface by Warren Buffett. He couldn't put it down. Graham spoke of owning stocks not as pieces of paper to trade, but as shares in real businesses. He talked about treating Mr. Market like a manic-depressive person whose moods swing between fear and greed, and using those moods to your advantage. For Guy, this value investing philosophy made such intuitive sense, it felt obvious. Soon after, he read Roger Lowenstein's biography, Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist. He was captivated. Here was someone who lived and worked in complete opposition to the snake pit Guy found himself in. Buffett wasn't hustling for fees or stabbing people in the back. He operated from integrity, patience, and rationality. It felt like Buffett was reaching out a hand to pull him from the moral quicksand. Guy grabbed on for dear life. This marked the beginning of his journey out of darkness. But first, he had to understand how he'd gotten there. What possessed a supposedly smart person to do something so spectacularly foolish? This started his inward journey. One of his first realizations was that his elite education had, in some ways, left him dangerously vulnerable. At Oxford and Harvard, he'd been trained to win an academic game. He learned to dazzle intellectually, to fire back quick, sharp answers that would earn approval from peers and professors. He was driven entirely by that outer scorecard. This is dangerous for an investor, because value investing requires going your own way, seeing where the crowd is wrong. To become a good investor, he needed to learn to measure himself by an inner scorecard, finding acceptance not from others, but from within himself. His education had also filled his head with elegant economic theories like the efficient markets hypothesis. This theory says stock prices reflect all available information, meaning there are no bargains to find. It's a powerful classroom idea, but in the real world it's simply not true. Clinging to this theory made him so arrogant that when Warren Buffett came to speak at Harvard, Guy dismissed him as a lucky speculator. He didn't even sit down during the lecture. His fragile ego was more important than learning from a master. Only after being humbled and humiliated at D.H. Blair was his mind open enough to re-examine everything he believed. The worst decision of his life turned out to be a gift. It showed him, raw and unvarnished, everything wrong with Wall Street and with himself. And it opened him up to Warren Buffett's principles, which would change his life forever. After leaving D.H. Blair, Guy found himself unemployable. The stain on his resume was impossible to remove. Wall Street insiders saw him as either too stupid to know what was happening at the firm, or too dangerous to hire. The rejections piled up. He began feeling like an outcast. He was stuck. At this low point, his re-education began in the most unexpected way, with self-help guru Tony Robbins. Intellectual snobbery almost made him dismiss Robbins as a crass quack. But friends with stellar academic credentials convinced him to attend a seminar called Unleash the Power Within. Skeptical, He stood at the back while 2,000 people jumped up and down, yelling things like, "Yes, I am a force for good." It felt like a cult, but over several hours, Robbins won him over with sheer authenticity. He was transparent about his motives, admitting he wanted to make money, but even more, he wanted to help people. That first night, in an altered state of intense determination, Guy and the other attendees walked across a 20-foot bed of red-hot embers. He doesn't know the scientific explanation for why their feet didn't burn, but for him, it was transformative. The firewalk became a metaphor for breaking through limitations. A goal that seems impossible one moment can become possible the next if you devote every ounce of your being to it. Robbins hammered into his head that if you're stuck, you have to just do it. Just make a move. Any move. This was exactly what Guy needed to hear. His academic training had left him with analysis paralysis. Now he was learning to act. He started voraciously reading other self-help books, like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, a book Buffett himself credits with changing his life, and Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. These books became his life instruction manuals, teaching him a more practical way of thinking about human nature. He was uneducating himself, dropping his narrow prejudices, and beginning to learn from everyone. He also started taking practical steps. He joined the New York Society of Securities Analysts. He bought software to screen for Ben Graham-style net stocks. He pored over value line reports and bought his first stock, Burlington Coat Factory. He was captivated by the idea that a stock wasn't just a piece of paper, but part ownership in a real business. He began seeing a small ecosystem of value investors who operated with the same integrity as Buffett. He dreamed of working at a firm like Tweedy, Brown, a bastion of this investing approach. They didn't have a job for him, but they gave him a copy of Buffett's classic essay, The Super Investors of Graham and Doddsville. In it, he discovered another legendary firm, Ruan Cunniff, which managed the Sequoia Fund. He managed to get a single share of the Sequoia Fund on eBay so he could attend their annual meetings. The goal wasn't just making money. It was about choosing to have certain people in his life who embodied the values he admired. He was learning to create the right environment to tilt the playing field in his favor. But his most powerful tool of re-education came from a simple question he started asking himself repeatedly. What would Warren Buffett do if he were in my shoes? He didn't just ask this idly. He would sit at his desk and actively imagine he was Buffett. He would picture what Buffett would do first. This is a process Tony Robbins calls modeling. The ability to mimic is one of the most powerful ways humans advance. As Guy discovered, you don't even need your heroes to be accessible. You can get many benefits of mentorship just by studying them relentlessly. The minute he started mirroring Buffett, his life changed. It was like tuning into a different frequency. His behavior shifted. He was no longer stuck. Imagining he was Buffett, he started studying the companies in Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio. Coca-Cola, American Express, Gillette. He ordered their annual reports. When he saw the cash flow statement for a company like Capital Cities ABC, he couldn't believe his eyes. The company was swimming in cash. It felt like embarking on a second MBA. He flew to Omaha for his first Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting, not knowing a soul. He felt giddy, childlike joy driving past Buffett's modest house and dining at his favorite steakhouse. He had emerged from the desert and found his promised land. Then one day, his father called. Seeing Guy's mounting fascination with investing, he said, "Guy, if you don't break out on your own now, you'd be completely nuts." He entrusted Guy with about $1 million of his life savings. A year later, with additional investments from business associates, the Aquamarine Fund was born with around $15 million in assets. He was finally doing what he felt born to do, but now, the real test would begin. Starting his own fund, Guy was determined to do things the right way. He consciously modeled Buffett, creating only one fund so he'd have only one track record, with no place to hide. He invested almost 100% of his own net worth in the fund, truly eating his own cooking. But he was still in New York. And it was easy to get sucked into the vortex of the New York financial world, with its skewed values and seductions. He believed he could use the force of his intellect to rise above his environment. He was wrong. As he gradually discovered, our environment is much stronger than our intellect. His advisors, steeped in industry standards, convinced him to adopt a typical hedge fund fee structure, a 1% annual management fee plus 20% of profits. This subtly misaligned his interests with his shareholders. Buffett's original partnership charged no management fee and only took a share of profits above a certain return. Guy knew this was better, but he let himself be swayed by the crowd. It was a mistake that would haunt him later. For the first few years, he worked in blissful isolation from his apartment, and his returns were decent. He avoided the tech bubble of the late 90s, protected by the common sense of the value investors now in his orbit. His fund grew to over $50 million, and he started getting noticed. Wall Street, which he wasn't interested in, became interested in him. This was a mixed blessing. He was dangerously flattered. People started comparing him to other rising stars from his Harvard class, like Bill Ackman. The competitive juices started flowing. He felt a deep, hungry need for size and status. The green-eyed monster of envy had gotten the better of him. As Charlie Munger says, envy is the only one of the 7 deadly sins that isn't any fun. It's 100% destructive. For an investor, it's a silent killer. It leads you to behave in ways you wouldn't otherwise. Guy wanted people to see him managing billions, just like his peers. He lost his way. He rented a plush office in Carnegie Hall Tower, driving up his expenses. He hired staff. He rented a Bloomberg terminal, which he describes as the informational equivalent of smoking crack cocaine. Envy and pride are expensive flaws. He was chasing false idols, trying to feel better about himself by acquiring the trappings of success. He was back to measuring himself by that outer scorecard. Fortunately, he also got some things right. He began surrounding himself with a mastermind group of investors, a weekly forum they called the Posse. It included people like David Eigen, Ken Schubinstein, and occasionally Bill Ackman. They would meet to debate and dissect stock ideas. This expanded his knowledge far beyond what he could learn from books, and produced friendships that became a source of competitive strength. This group saved him from a big mistake with a company called Farmer Mac. Guy thought it was an undiscovered gem, a smaller version of government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But Bill Ackman, a brilliant and intense analyst, had researched the company until 4 a.m. and reached the opposite conclusion. He was shorting the stock, convinced it was going to zero. Ackman walked Guy through his analysis, showing him a shelf filled with a decade's worth of annotated filings. He explained why Farmer Mac was nothing like Freddie and Fannie. Its packages of farm loans were far riskier than they seemed. Guy felt his stomach turn. He realized he didn't understand nearly enough about the company to justify owning it. That day, he sold his entire position at a profit. He'd been saved by his network. But then he got carried away. He joined Ackman in the combat sport of shorting the stock, asking pointed questions on conference calls and talking to the New York Times. He felt self-righteous indignation that, in retrospect, didn't reflect well on him. His goal was to compound money for his shareholders, not to be an avenging moral crusader. He got his comeuppance when he was roped into a government investigation into hedge funds allegedly manipulating stock prices. It went nowhere, but it was stressful and expensive. Life, he realized, was too short for this sort of conflict. He drifted off course, caught up in unnecessary distractions. He didn't need a fancy office, he didn't need to be a big shot, and he didn't need the acrimony of shorting stocks. He knew what didn't work for him, but he still needed to find a better way. In his early years, Guy wanted to be a superstar. To do that, he felt he needed to learn how to sell himself. This led him, strangely, to the work of Charlie Munger and a renowned academic named Robert Cialdini, author of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. What affected him most was a story Cialdini told about a Chevrolet salesman named Joe Girard, who became the world's top car salesman simply by sending holiday cards to thousands of former customers with the words, "I like you," printed inside. We are, Cialdini writes, phenomenal suckers for flattery. Guy decided to go to the extreme. He started writing 3 letters a day, 15 a week. He thanked people for giving great speeches, for great meals, for sending investor letters. He sent birthday cards, articles, and books. At first, it was a calculated experiment to improve his business, but it started feeling really good. He became addicted to the positive emotions it stirred in him. As he looked for more opportunities to thank people, he genuinely became more thankful. The more goodwill he expressed, the more he began to feel it. This small habit of writing hundreds of letters a year was transformational. It was a way of compounding goodwill in relationships, not just money. Here's the paradox. As he became more authentic and discarded his selfish agenda, people became more interested in investing with him. A couple years into this writing campaign, he met a young Wharton student who told him about an investor named Mohnish Pabrai. Guy had never heard of him, but the student said his returns were phenomenal. So Guy decided to attend Pabrai's annual meeting in Chicago. Mohnish Pabrai was different. An immigrant from India, he'd built and sold an IT business before setting up his own investment firm in 1999, which he modeled meticulously on Buffett's original partnerships. His returns were superb, but Guy was equally struck by his understated, unconventional style. The meeting wasn't in a fancy hotel. It was in a restaurant near the airport on a weekend. Guests dressed casually. Mohnish wasn't there to sell. He was there to teach. He spoke honestly and straightforwardly, unafraid of what anyone might think. He was comfortable with who he was. After the meeting, Guy went home and wrote Mohnish a short, handwritten thank you note. It was one of a dozen he sent that week. He had no agenda and expected nothing in return. 6 months later, Mohnish emailed him. He was going to be in Connecticut. Did Guy want to meet for dinner? That meal with Mohnish Pabrai altered the trajectory of Guy's life. Mohnish later told him he was the only person who had written to thank him after that meeting. Every letter Guy wrote was an invitation for serendipity to strike. He didn't understand it at the time, but he was picking up lottery tickets that were almost free. It was a value investing approach to life. At that dinner, Guy saw a man completely at ease with himself. The person on the outside was the same as the person on the inside. He wasn't pretending to be anything for anybody. Mohnish embodied the idea that real power resides with a person who is honest and in touch with himself. Mohnish was a master cloner. He believed the best way to succeed was to copy the best ideas and make them your own. He'd relentlessly copied Buffett's partnership structure, including the fee structure Guy had failed to implement. Guy was humbled to realize he was like the owner of the struggling gas station, while Mohnish owned the successful one across the street. Having simply copied all the best practices, their friendship blossomed. A few months later, they met for breakfast overlooking Central Park. Mohnish raised an idea that had never occurred to Guy. They should join forces and bid for the annual charity lunch with Warren Buffett. At first, Guy thought it was insane to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a meal, but Mohnish walked him through the unconventional analysis. The money would go to a worthy charity, the Glide Foundation. It wasn't about getting anything tangible from the lunch. It was an opportunity to thank Buffett for everything he'd taught them. They lost the auction the first year. The next year, Mohnish was determined to win. Guy was worried about the cost and told Mohnish his budget was capped. Mohnish, in an extraordinary act of generosity, assured him that if the bidding went higher, he would cover the balance himself. They didn't even shake hands on it. It was a level of trust that reminded Guy of how Buffett himself did business. They won the auction with a bid of $650,100. Their lunch was set for June 25, 2008. The prospect of meeting his hero forced Guy to confront the ways he was still misaligned. He couldn't bear the thought of showing up at the lunch as just another greedy hedge fund manager charging 1 in 20. Mohnish didn't charge a management fee. Buffett's annual salary was a famously low $100,000. So before the lunch, Guy instituted a new share class for his fund, mirroring the fee structure of Buffett's original partnerships. No annual management fee, and an incentive fee only after his investors earned a 6% return. He should have done it a decade earlier, but the mere expectation of meeting Buffett made him want to be better. The lunch took place at Smith & Wollensky Steakhouse in Manhattan. It was Guy, his wife Lori, Monish, his wife Harina, and their 2 young daughters. The presence of family made it light-hearted and joyful. Buffett was warm and friendly, more like an amiable grandfather than one of the world's richest men. He ordered a medium-rare steak, hash browns, and a cherry Coke. He'd clearly read up on them, asking Lori about her hometown, and flooring Monish by saying he'd sent the annual report for Monish's charity, Dakshana, to Bill Gates and Charlie Munger. Early in the conversation, Guy confessed that he'd changed his fee structure so Buffett wouldn't think he was just another greedy hedge fund guy. He'll never forget Buffett's response. People will always stop you from doing the right thing if it's unconventional. Then, Buffett shared the single most important lesson of the day. He asked them, "Would you prefer to be considered the best lover in the world and know privately that you're the worst? Or would you prefer to know privately that you're the best lover in the world but be considered the worst?" The answer, of course, is obvious. But it was only later that Guy felt the full force of this advice. "It's very important," Buffett said, "always to live your life by an inner scorecard, not an outer scorecard." In that moment, Guy realized just how much of his life he'd spent measuring himself by that outer scorecard, seeking the approval of professors, wanting to be seen as a successful deal-maker, being admired as a top-notch fund manager. This neediness had led him astray. If he'd lived by an inner scorecard, he would have run for his life from D.H. Blair. How many excesses of the financial crisis would have been avoided if people had lived by an inner scorecard? He also learned about patience. Monish asked about a brilliant investor from Buffett's past named Rick Guerin. Warren told them Guerin had been in a hurry to get rich and had used leverage to juice his returns. When the market crashed in the 70s, he was wiped out. "Charlie and I always knew we would become very wealthy," Buffett told them, "but we weren't in a hurry. If you're even a slightly above-average investor who spends less than you earn, you cannot help but get very wealthy over a lifetime, if you're patient." Perhaps the greatest lesson of the lunch was seeing Buffett's authenticity. There was no artifice. His strength came from a rock-solid sense of who he is and how he wants to live. He set up his life so it suits him. This became Guy's new goal. Not to be Warren Buffett, but to become a more authentic version of himself. As Buffett had taught him, the path to true success is through authenticity. Just a few months after that life-changing lunch, the financial world tumbled into chaos. The financial crisis of 2008 through 2009 was the ultimate test for any investor. Value investors pride themselves on being able to act rationally when there's blood in the streets. But as Guy would find out, it's one thing to say it, and another to live it. The crisis hit him from every angle. First, Bear Stearns, the firm that held all his fund's assets, teetered on the brink of insolvency. For a terrifying weekend, he faced the possibility that everything could disappear. He was saved only when J.P. Morgan Chase acquired the firm at the last minute. Then his own father, his largest investor, called to say he'd invested a sizable chunk of his other assets in Lehman Brothers bonds, on the advice of a broker from a prominent bank. The Wall Street selling machine, unable to offload the toxic bonds to professional investors, had touted them to overly trusting clients. Days later, Lehman filed for the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The pressure mounted. His own equity analyst, a man he was paying to be rational, came into his office and announced, "I've gone to cash. I'm going to wait till things settle down." Guy was stunned. Even those closest to him were being swept up in the panic. His fund, which had quadrupled investors' money in its first 10 years, was getting crushed. In 2008, he was down 46.7%. On paper, almost half of his family's money and his shareholders' money had gone up in smoke. But he'd prepared for this. He'd never lived beyond his means or fallen into debt. He was renting an apartment and had enough cash to ride out the storm. This attitude was deeply embedded in his family's psyche, born from the trauma of his great-grandparents losing everything when they fled Nazi Germany. He knew he needed to avoid debt because it would interfere with his ability to act rationally. His shareholders, for the most part, stayed firm. Most importantly, his father remained extraordinarily calm and didn't withdraw a dime, but a minority of investors bailed out. And because of the fund's redemption policy, the one his New York advisors had insisted on, he was forced to be a net seller of stocks at the very moment they'd never looked so cheap. At that moment, what he envied most about Buffett wasn't his intelligence, but his structural advantage. Berkshire Hathaway is a company with permanent capital. Buffett didn't have to worry about redemptions. He was free to make enormous investments at the perfect moment. Monash, too, had a better structure, allowing redemptions only once a year. 10 years after founding his fund, Guy was paying the price for not cloning Buffett's structure perfectly from the start. He also envied Buffett's physical detachment in Omaha, far from the madding crowd. Guy's own office in Manhattan's Carnegie Hall Tower was at the heart of the crisis, filled with fearful investment professionals. The palpable gloom was infectious. He managed to keep his wits about him by modeling his heroes. He read the Meditations of the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who wrote of welcoming adversity as an opportunity to prove one's courage. Confident in his analysis, he held on to his core investments and rode them to massive gains in the years that followed. And with the help of Monash's brilliant analysis, he started buying incredibly cheap stocks. It was, he says, like shooting fish in a barrel. The financial crisis may well have been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. On the investing front, he'd acquitted himself well. But the crisis had shown him that investment success wasn't just about identifying great stock ideas. He had to create the best possible environment for himself, physically, intellectually, and emotionally, so he could operate more effectively. He couldn't clone Buffett's intelligence, but he could clone his environment. So he decided to hit the reset button. 6 months after the lunch with Buffett, he left New York for Zurich, Switzerland. The move to Zurich was about creating his own version of Omaha. He realized that the human brain is a confounded thing, woefully ill-suited to the task of investing. Our rational neocortex, what psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls thinking slow, is easily bypassed by the sub-rational, instinctive part of the brain, the thinking fast system that evolved to help our ancestors survive in the wilderness. Money-related issues often activate these primitive survival routines. Knowing this, Guy realized his only advantage was the humble realization of just how flawed his brain really is. Once he accepted this, he could design practical workarounds. The most important workaround was his environment. He needed to get away from the restless energy and extreme wealth of New York, a place author Nassim Taleb calls extremistan. The disparity between your wealth and your neighbors can play a huge role in your happiness, triggering envy and a temptation to swing for the fences. He chose Zurich, a place he saw as mediocristan, where life is more mundane. Boring is good. As an investor, that's exactly what he wanted. He needed a plain, unobtrusive background that wasn't overly exciting. He constructed his new life with meticulous care. He chose an office a 12-minute walk from his home, just outside the city center, mirroring Buffett and Pabrai. He physically divided his office into a busy room with a computer and a library with no phone or computer, a quiet space for sitting and thinking. He adorned his office with a bust of Charlie Munger and photos of Buffett and his first investors, using these images as subconscious cues to activate their presence in his mind. He learned to manage his relationship with the informational fire hose. He relegated his Bloomberg terminal to a standing desk in the busy room, making it uncomfortable to use for long periods. He now often goes weeks without turning it on at all. He stopped checking stock prices constantly, realizing that the constant movement is a call to action that depletes his limited willpower. The rule became, check stock prices as infrequently as possible. He also created a set of simple, robust rules to protect himself from his own worst instincts. These rules became his investing tools. Rule 1. If someone tries to sell you something, don't buy it. His brain, he admitted, is awful at making rational decisions when confronted with a gifted salesperson. So he simply says, I have a rule that I don't allow myself to buy anything that's being sold to me. This eliminates IPOs, pitches from brokers, and even well-meaning suggestions from friends at cocktail parties if they have a personal agenda. Rule 2. Don't talk to management. CEOs tend to be highly skilled salespeople, gifted at accentuating the positive. He prefers not to expose himself to this potentially distorting influence. He can assess the quality of management in a more detached way by studying their track record in annual reports and public data. Rule 3. Gather investment research in the right order. The first idea to enter the brain tends to stick. So he starts with the most objective sources, the company's public filings, and only reads press coverage or analyst reports at the very end, after he's already formed his own impression. Rule 4. Never buy or sell stocks when the market is open. He needs to detach himself from the price action, which can stir up emotions. He emails his broker after hours and asks to trade at the average price for the next day. This keeps the market at a safe distance. Rule 5. If a stock tumbles after you buy it, don't sell it for 2 years. This rule, borrowed from Moharishi, acts as a circuit breaker. It forces him to be more careful before buying a stock, knowing he has to live with his mistakes. Rule 6. Don't talk about your current investments. Once you make a public statement, it's psychologically difficult to back away from it, even if you come to realize you were wrong. This commitment and consistency principle can trap you. But even with the right environment and the right rules, we're still going to mess up. This led him to his most powerful tool, the investor's checklist. The idea came from Monish, who'd read an article by surgeon Atul Gawande. Gawande described how doctors in intensive care were using simple checklists to avoid preventable mistakes in a field of extreme complexity. Monish had a eureka moment. Investing is also a field of extreme complexity, where even super specialists routinely trip up. Together they began to marshal a list of their own investing mistakes, trying to work out why they'd happened. Monish even hired Harvard students to conduct a painstaking forensic investigation of the failed investments of 20 smart value investors. From this cornucopia of screw-ups, they designed checklist items to prevent them from repeating these mistakes. The checklist became the final circuit breaker in the decision-making process. Before pulling the trigger on any investment, Guy pulls out his list of about 70 items to see what he might be missing. It's not a shopping list of desirable attributes like, is the company cheap? It's a survival tool, based on the haunting remembrance of things past. For example, after his blow-up with the CEO of EVCI, who was going through a bitter divorce, he added a checklist item. Are any of the key members of the company's management team going through a difficult personal experience that might radically affect their ability to act for the benefit of their shareholders? After his failed investment in Tupperware, which had a powerful sales model but an overpriced product, he added, is this company providing a win-win for its entire ecosystem? After getting burned by his over-leveraged investment in CarMax, he added, how could this business be affected by changes in other parts of the value chain that lie beyond the company's control? And after overpaying for Smart Balance because he was seduced by a superstar CEO, he added, is this stock cheap enough not just in relative terms? Am I sure that I'm paying for the business as it is today, not for an excessively rosy expectation of where it might be in the future? The checklist is a way of managing your own mind and guarding against your own tendencies. It needs to be based on this kind of deep self-awareness. This journey of transformation, from the moral maze of D.H. Blair to the quiet rationality of Zurich, wasn't just about building a better process. It was about becoming a better person. By observing Warren and Monish, he learned to become a giver, not a taker. He learned that the best way to succeed is to surround yourself with the right people. As Buffett told him, hang out with people better than you, and you cannot help but improve. Relationships, he realized, are the killer app. His friendship with Monish was a testament to this, a relationship built on sharing, trust, and generosity. He saw how Monish constantly looked for ways to help others, creating an incredible network of people who wished him well. He was compounding goodwill. And the paradox is that you end up receiving infinitely more in life by giving than by taking. Buffett understood this perfectly. When you get to my age, he once told a class of students, you'll really measure your success in life by how many of the people you want to have love you actually love you. The only way to get love is to be lovable. This became Guy's new focus. His life improved immeasurably when he started to live this way, finding ways to serve others. He became addicted to the positive emotions it awakened in him. He receives way more by giving than he ever did by taking. The quest for value, he finally understood, isn't just a stock-picking strategy. It's a quest for true value, for a meaning that goes beyond money. It's an inner journey toward becoming the best version of ourselves we can be. If you don't understand your inner landscape, your fears, insecurities, and biases, you're likely to be mugged by reality. The stock market has an uncanny way of finding us out, of exposing our weaknesses. To achieve sustainable success, we need to confront our vulnerabilities. But the real reward of this inner transformation isn't just enduring investment success. It's the gift of becoming the best person we can be. That, surely, is the ultimate prize. Guy Spier's journey is so powerful because it's a story we can all relate to. It's about making mistakes, big, embarrassing, career-threatening mistakes, and finding a way not just to recover, but to become stronger in the broken places. What I find most profound about the education of a value investor is its central, unwavering message that the world of investing is not ultimately a battle of wits or intellect. It's a battle with yourself. The stock market is a giant, unforgiving mirror that reflects back every one of our psychological flaws, our greed, our fear, our envy, our need for approval. Spier started out thinking the game was about being the smartest guy in the room. He had the credentials to prove it. But his painful experience at D.H. Blair taught him that intelligence without integrity is not just worthless, it's dangerous. His journey away from the outer scorecard of public approval and toward the inner scorecard of personal character is the real education he received. This book isn't a manual filled with financial formulas. It's a guide to structuring your life in a way that allows your better self to win. Spier's obsession with creating the right environment, building checklists based on past failures, and surrounding himself with people better than him is a masterclass in humility. He admits his brain is flawed, that he's prone to irrationality, and instead of fighting it with sheer willpower, which he knows is a limited resource, he builds systems to protect himself from himself. That is true wisdom. The transformation from a taker to a giver is perhaps the most inspiring part of his story. He learns from Monish Pabrai and Warren Buffett that the most effective way to operate in the world, and the most joyful, is to constantly look for ways to help others. The compounding of goodwill, he discovers, yields returns far greater than any stock. So how can we start applying these lessons in our own lives right now? Here are 3 simple actions you can take today. First, begin to practice living by an inner scorecard. The next time you have to make a decision, big or small, pause and ask yourself, am I doing this to look good to others, or because it aligns with my own core values? Would I still make this choice if nobody ever knew about it? This simple question can be a powerful compass. Second, audit your environment. Think about the physical and social worlds you inhabit. What is one source of noise or distraction in your physical space that you can remove today to help you think more clearly? Maybe it's turning off notifications on your phone or creating a dedicated quiet space for reading. And socially, think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. As Buffett says, you will move in their direction. Are they pulling you up? Third, practice compounding goodwill. Don't wait for a reason. Today, write one genuine, heartfelt thank you note or email to someone who has helped you, someone who doesn't expect it. Feel the shift inside you as you focus on gratitude and giving with no agenda. That was a journey through the education of a value investor by Guy Spier. We've explored the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you hold the book in your hands. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story, or a simple phrase, connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This podcast is designed to help you decide if a book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, the struggle for integrity, the quest for a better way to live, the power of learning from mistakes, then I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself and your path forward. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful ideas to more people. Let's keep growing together.